The case for democracy is made on the basis that it allows people to elect their government, hence giving them the consent of the governed. Now, my objection to this concept is not necessarily that I think it's a bad idea in theory. My objection is that it fails to understand how power is actually wielded within civil society. The democratic system in no way provides the populace the ability to determine the power structure under which they are ruled. And the notion that a democratic government rules by the consent of the populace and in any way reflects their will is completely false. To understand why this is the case, we need to understand what people in civil society are really ruled by. People are ruled by power. Now, what exactly is power? Power is the ability to get people to conform to your will, to get them to do what you want them to and to not do what you don't want them to reward those who conform or punish those who dissent. And the power structure under which civil society is governed goes far beyond the elected officials of said society. In fact, they are not above this rule, because power is wielded by things like cultural norms, religious institutions, intellectual thought, media outlets, and of course, financial power. These organs of influence form what is a wider societal consensus under which the society is governed. They have the ability to instill a worldview into the populace, pressure them into living what's deemed an acceptable lifestyle, and have them respect the authority structure as a whole. And this is not something the populace consents to. It's imposed from the top down. The officials that the voters in a democracy elect are still subject to this rule and act more in accordance to this force than they do the will of their constituencies. Likewise, the ability to change the power structure of a civil society is much more difficult than simply voting one government out of office and voting another one in, because both exist in the context of a wider societal consensus, with the same organs of influence in place, applying pressures upon them. They set the boundaries of the Overton window. Sure, two different political parties might have slightly different policies, but they exist under the same paradigm, and in a democracy, there isn't that much that you can do to change this, since the aforementioned positions of power are largely unelected. And there really is no way to refuse to consent to authority in this civil society, short of escaping into the woods and isolating yourself from the rest of society as a whole, at least without being met with some sort of resistance from the power structure, because no social order would allow its own destruction. Those with power, the ability to get people to conform to their will, would do all they could in order to maintain their position as of authority. Now let's look at the modern West. Why is this lie of the Enlightenment so detrimental to us today? Because it gives the liberal democratic order under which the West is ruled today a false sense of legitimacy. That the power structure under which we live is by the consent of us, the governed, and that we have the ability to change it through the democratic process. For anyone on the dissident right who sees the West headed in the wrong direction, ruled by corrupt globalist elites, we must understand the nature of the power structure that rules us today, because it's certainly one that we are not in control of, and it all comes down to power, the ability to make people conform to your will. So what are some of the organs of influence governing the West today? The media. Multi-billion-dollar corporations which control the means of information distribution. They have the ability to craft a narrative which is sold to the wider public as the objective truth. These corporations can decide what they report on, how they portray the events, and tell you how you're supposed to think about them. And now, with social media becoming the public space, tech companies have massive control over the distribution of information. They have the ability to decide what someone can and can't say. And if you're advancing a narrative that they don't approve of, they can simply deny you access to their platform. The education system, the conditioning under which every member of society must undergo from their childhood all the way to adulthood. Public education teaches the youth from their youngest age how they're supposed to understand the world, while higher education instills the desired worldview into those who will make up the positions of power in the future. The academy has the ability to deem sources of information credible or not credible, since after all, they're the educated ones. And most of all, money power. Corporations, lobby groups, NGOs, banks. Capital has the ability to determine how society's resources are allocated. They decide who gets funding and who does not. And all of these have the ability to bankroll the societal changes they want to see. These are the various organs of influence exerting power over the Western liberal democracies today, none of which are democratically elected. And it just so happens that the vast majority of these bodies are in support of the cause of progressive globalism. They form what Mencius Moldbug referred to as the cathedral, the ideological consensus held by the intelligentsia. That's why our culture today is dominated by progressivism, because it's the societal direction that the elites in power want to push. These various arms of the cathedral wield far more power over the lives of individuals than any elected official does. While the government has the ability to govern by force, the cathedral has the ability to govern by soft power. This decentralized yet ideologically uniform governing force has the ability to put forth a societal narrative that forms the West's understanding of good and evil. The cathedral sets the boundaries of the Overton window, deciding which opinions are acceptable and which ones are not. It has the ability to control people, not through force, but through social shaming and economic intimidation, by labeling dissenters fascists and threatening their employment. The cathedral has the ability to run a media smear campaign against a public figure who steps out of line. It has the ability to suppress scientific evidence that contradicts its narratives and deem those who pursue it racist. And most of all, it has the ability to lobby politicians for the policies the elites want to enact. This is how power is actually wielded in the West today. And this is by no means by the consent of the governed population, nor does the democratic system provide the populace the ability to change this. You can vote Trump out of the White House, but you can't vote Jon Stewart out of the media. You can't vote Susan Wojcicki out of the tech industry. You can't vote Noam Chomsky out of the academy. Under liberalism, you can vote to replace politicians, but you can't vote to replace the media, the education system, the corporations, and these bodies exercise much more power over the individual in their day-to-day life than their local government does. Even in the abstract, I believe that the idea that democracy grants legitimacy through the consent of the governed is false. My objection to the powers that be today is not that they reign undemocratically. Again, I believe that this is just the nature of power. My objection is that the societal consensus that they're imposing is anti-human and designed to destroy the West. The reason that the cathedral is drifting closer and closer to totalitarianism isn't because it's undemocratic. It's because the social order they're trying to enforce is anti-human and requires control over people's lives in order to maintain. My goal isn't to achieve real democracy, because I doubt that's even possible. My goal is to replace the destructive globalist order with a more stable and healthy order. But it takes more than just winning an election to do that. It's a game of metapolitics. In order to change the direction of society, there needs to be a new consensus, and the organs of influence must be replaced. That's a lot harder than winning one election. And in order to make change, we must first understand the nature of power. Because democracy does not put it in our hands.